Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's seminar. Please note all attendees are on mute, but if you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A button in the control panel. We will answer all questions at the end of the session. I would now like to hand over to our host for today, Simon King.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Simon King. I'm the Director of Sustainability and Social Value at Mitie. Today's webinar will be in 3 sections, followed by questions and answers, as has just been explained. Firstly, we'll look at why action on a zero carbon recovery is critical. Secondly, what makes up Mitie's own Plan Zero, before moving on to examples of action that has been taken to make a zero carbon future a reality. I'm delighted that to cover the first element of why action on a zero carbon recovery is critical, we're joined by our guest speaker and real expert in this field, Isabella O'Dowd. Isabella is the climate specialist at the WWF, the world's leading independent conservation organisation, who are taking a leading role in tackling the climate crisis. Isabella has been with WWF for 3 years and has deep expertise in renewable energy and the climate emergency. Isabella has also recently launched a new report with Vivid Economics, looking at where green jobs will be needed in an economic recovery that keeps the government on track for their net zero commitment. Isabella, thanks very much for your time today. Over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Hi, I'm Isabella O'Dowd, Climate Change Specialist at WWF. I've been working on net zero policy for the last 2.5 years, and as Simon says, I'm now working on green recovery. At WWF, we see climate change as one of the greatest environmental challenges the world has ever faced. But we know that we can do something about it. We have the knowledge and we have the tools. As David Attenborough says, what we do in the next 10 years will affect the next 10,000. We have a very limited time to respond to this emergency, and we are one of the last generations that can stop devastating climate change. Next slide, please. In October 2018, the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change special report really set out the difference and the importance of 1.5 degrees versus a 2-degree world. It also really started to lay the groundwork for net zero. And globally, it says that countries as a whole, we need to be net zero by 2050. But this obviously requires developed countries to move a lot faster. Next slide, please. One of the really sort of harsh stats that stood out for me from that report on the difference between a 2-degree world and a 1.5 degree world is that in 2 degrees, you virtually lose all of coral reefs. I think it's 99%. And in a 1.5 degree world, you're still losing 70% of your coral reefs, which are obviously very critical parts of our ecosystem. And a real shame and a real loss to nature and biodiversity of those coral reefs are lost. So for us, that is why 1.5 degrees is a must. And we at WWF have been doing a lot of work around net zero, particularly with the UK government, trying to push this agenda forward. Next slide. Thank you. So what is net zero greenhouse gas emissions? I'm going to mainly focus on the UK because that's where my work is, but we have seen lots of countries around the world also following and setting net zero targets. Last May, Theresa May set a UK legally binding target of net zero by 2050 greenhouse gas emissions. That's kind of a step forward from net zero carbon emissions. And this was a positive step for us and something we can now work towards and hold the government to as their legally binding target. What does this mean in practice? It means that we're balancing the sources and the removal of carbon. So the amount we are emitting is offset by the amount that we are removing from the atmosphere so that we get to a net zero greenhouse gas emission target. Next slide, please. Back in November 2018, when the whole net zero debate was starting, we commissioned Vivid Economics to produce 2 pathways for us in a report called Keeping It Cool. The first pathway was a 2050 pathway, and the second pathway was a 2045 pathway. And for us at WWF, we were very keen to look at 2045 because we think we need to get there as soon as possible. And since this report was published, the Committee on Climate Change produced its report to government on net zero. And from that analysis, I think you can actually make a date, the case for an earlier date than 2045. So I think the main focus for us is what can we do in the next 10 years to really set us on track and accelerate so that we can get to net zero as soon as possible. Next slide, please. So our report looked at how we achieve net zero by 2045, and I'm going to quickly run through what that looks like in practice. So it meant that power, buildings and transport basically get to zero emissions, whether that's through renewable energy, electric vehicles, or improved living conditions in terms of improved energy efficiency of properties. And there was a whole suite of recommendations in that report, but you're assuming that power, buildings and transport can get to zero. We've already seen quite a lot of acceleration and progress in those sectors, and so those would get to zero. Industry, agriculture, aviation and shipping are harder areas to decarbonize, so we need rapid and deep emission cuts, but those emissions can't get us to zero. So in order to achieve the net zero target, you need to remove carbon from the air to balance off those remaining emissions. At WWF, we see nature-based solutions as having a really critical and important role in that, not only for kind of improving biodiversity and restoring nature, but also having that really critical role of helping remove carbon from the atmosphere. And what kind of made the difference between a 2050 and a 2045 target was that we saw more behaviour change in 2045 target. So we saw a higher percentage, I think 50% of people were eating more plant-based diets over time. We saw more international collaboration to help cut emissions. So whether that's international collaboration, which really accelerates technologies into development, or international in terms of aviation and how emissions are accounted for, and potentially you might start seeing electric flights to Paris or Amsterdam, to some short-haul European flights, but that needs the kind of international angle in order to get to that point. Next slide, please. I think what's been really encouraging throughout this process is we've seen really strong business support for this. So back in May last year, before Theresa May set our legally binding target, I think we saw over 100 businesses write into her, really highlighting why this is important and showing business leadership. A few weeks ago, we saw a similar letter on green recovery, which actually had over 200 business CEOs write in to the Chancellor and the PM to say why green recovery is such an important part of recovering from this crisis. So at WWF, we've been engaging with business. We have this screening, which is Our Planet, Our Business, which is taken from the Our Planet series that's on Netflix, narrated by David Attenborough. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but I would highly recommend it. But we have a specialized Our Planet, Our Business screening, which WWF organize. In your organizations, we can have people come along and do that. And it's got a mixture of very influential business leaders kind of going through why this challenge is so important and why it makes sense to really kind of take the lead and be ahead and sort of protect your business going forward. Next slide, please. So moving on to green recovery, which is taking up most of my time at the moment. I think we've seen some positive first steps in the Chancellor's speech last week, where he really signalled that they want a green recovery with an announcement around energy efficiency. I think what was interesting from the Chancellor's speech was we were still in that rescue stage of kind of short-term job creation, restarting the economy, and we would expect in an autumn budget to see more around green recovery and recovery in general. And at WWF, we've been working to kind of make the case to government of the importance of green recovery and the importance of building resilience as we recover from this health pandemic. Next slide, please. So we commissioned another report, which Simon mentioned at the beginning, so Keeping Us Competitive by Vivid Economics. We'd actually commissioned this report before we went into lockdown, actually last year, to really look at what are the investments needed to get us on track to achieve net zero, and specifically looking at the Treasury net zero review that's happening this year. When we went into lockdown, we got Vivid Economics to repurpose it into a shorter 5-page briefing, because a lot of what was included in there is still really relevant in the context of COVID and recovery and how we build back better from this crisis. Next slide, please. So what Keeping Us Competitive really shows that green makes sense regardless of the climate and nature benefits, which we are obviously working on in a lot of detail, and that 90 billion of benefits are on offer to the UK if we make sure we invest in the right sectors that provide long-lasting jobs and opportunities, and also the co-benefits. So there's a lot of evidence that shows that obviously switching to electric vehicles, improving your air quality, really helps in terms of health. The same again with improved living conditions. That has a lot that it can do in terms of savings on the NHS. The green growth jobs numbers, that's looking at, you know, if we lead and we take advantage, we in the UK can create long-lasting and good jobs in green sectors that are fit for the future and also fit in a low resource constrained world. And then obviously the cost of inaction. So we've already seen a lot of impact from climate change, from flooding, water shortages here in the UK, as well as in lots of other countries. So making sure that we really avoid those costs as much as we can by investing in the right sectors in the comprehensive spending review and the budget this year. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the report, the shorter 5-page report that was focused on green recovery, really honed in on the job figures. I think there's been a lot of evidence as we have kind of been going through this lockdown of what green can offer in terms of what it can offer the economy. So our report shows that for every £1 spent on low carbon investment options, it can return 3 to 8 times the initial investment. And not only does it do that, it provides jobs for the UK, which we will obviously need as we sort of go into the recession. So we've got at least 210,000 jobs in key sectors, and we're keen to stress that this is just kind of a starting point. So this is looking at green buildings, which has the highest number of jobs, 85,000 direct jobs in green retrofitting by 2030, and 7,000 in installing heat and cooling, which we expect to grow as the industry develops. The government's also committed to 40 gigawatts of offshore wind, which could support at least 28,000 jobs, including in manufacturing. And low carbon investment in electric vehicles could support around 11,000 jobs by 2030. And there's more jobs on offer with batteries and charging infrastructure. This analysis was quite technology specific. And so we think that there could be more jobs on offer than some of these. And this was just kind of a starting point to show the importance. I think another stat that really has stood out for me during this period is that there was an Oxford University paper that showed in the last financial crash in 2008, three out of the five things that performed the best in terms of economic resilience were investment in low carbon infrastructure, and research and development into low carbon infrastructure, and energy efficiency. So those were some of the things that economically did the best after the last financial crash. Next slide, please. So I briefly touched on strong business support, but keen to show that this agenda around green recovery and climate change is really widespread. So not only are we seeing business leaders stepping up, we're also seeing doctors, we're seeing health organisations, and we're also seeing a lot of MPs and wide range of voices, charities from all sorts of areas, writing in and showing why this is important and urging the government and the PM to really demand a green COVID-19 recovery. Next slide, please. So I'm going to end with COP26. So we were supposed to be hosting COP26 in the UK this year. That's now been delayed until next November. And this is a big international opportunity for countries to act, particularly the UK, to show that leadership. It was supposed to be 5 years on from the Paris Agreement. It will now be 6. And countries are expected to have produced their nationally determined contributions, so their climate change plans, on how they can really keep warming below 2 degrees with an ambition of 1.5 degrees. And we're seeing that shift to a lot more focus on 1.5 degrees. We have a really important role to make during this time, and there are going to be a lot of actions that businesses can do. At WWF, we're very supportive of businesses signing up to science-based targets, and there's a load of amazing initiatives, such as joining EV100 and RE100 in order to kind of really get engaged in these issues. And there's an opportunity, I think, here to be a leader. So this is the direction of travel, and we're starting to really see the impacts of climate change, even at the UK with the heat waves and the flooding, but also worldwide with some of the Arctic regions being extremely hot, and seeing the hottest years on record repeatedly. So I think this is an opportunity for us to stand up. We've got just over a year to really kind of lead the way and make that impact ahead of COP26. And I'm really excited to hear Mitie's plans on their net zero plans and what they're doing as an organisation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Isabella. That was fascinating. Thank you for taking us through that. We're now just going to move on to talk about Mitie's own commitments and what we as a business are doing in support of addressing the climate crisis. So Mitie's commitment is called Plan Zero. And Plan Zero is where we have committed to being at net zero carbon by the end of 2025. So significantly ahead of the targets for the UK as a whole, and indeed ahead of the timelines that Isabella's just been talking about, even with the acceleration that she mentioned. We're focusing on 3 key areas, and I'll go into each of them in just a little more detail in a moment. But those 3 areas are eliminating carbon emissions, eradicating non-sustainable waste, and enhancing inefficient buildings. And the reason that we focused on those areas is because of the impact that they have on the carbon emissions in the UK. Transport accounts for 34% of our total CO2 emissions in the UK. And if you include upstream and refining in there, that goes up even higher to above 40%. The energy that we then use, typically the electricity which is generated, is another large area, representing about 26% of the total for the UK. And then businesses with the gas that they use for heating, for space heating, is about 19% of our carbon emissions. So in total, those come to almost 80% of the CO2 emissions that we have in the UK. And then the waste area, whilst not a huge percentage of the total carbon emissions directly, is really important because, of course, many of those other areas that we've just talked about, whether that be transport, whether that be energy generation, or whether that be space heating and so on, are actually used in the production of, in technical terms, stuff. And so if we can use less stuff and then dispose of less stuff, then that actually helps reduce the overall emissions as well. So that's why we've chosen to focus on these three areas. And I'll just talk through each of those in a little more detail now. So next slide, please. So starting off with the eliminate carbon emissions from power and transport. The first area that we're focused on is our fleet. A significant proportion of that transport carbon emissions comes from cars and vans on the road. Mitie have over 5,500 vehicles, so one of the largest fleets in the UK. And so we're looking at how we can decarbonise that and transition across to electric vehicles, including making sure that our charge points are powered with green electricity. We're then also looking at the heating systems across our buildings, making sure that they're decarbonised by moving to solutions such as heat pumps, and also that we use 100% renewable energy, which we already do, but we want to improve how we buy that by moving towards a subsidy-free power purchase agreement as we transition our spend on diesel across to electric with our fleet transition. And then clearly there are many, many downsides to the COVID-19 situation. But one of the things that I think we have seen coming out of that is how technology can help us to work remotely. This webinar hopefully being a great example of that. And so how do we use technology to reduce work travel? Clearly, wherever we can, we should be looking at how we reduce the demand and then look at how we decarbonise after that. On the waste area, Mike Taylor, our MD of Waste, will talk more about this in a moment, but we're looking at eliminating single-use materials, how we embrace the circular economy and reduce our use of natural resources. And then we're also, from a cleaning point of view, looking at how we transition all of our products, both for our use and clearly for our clients as well, across to natural or non-toxic, biodegradable cleaning products. The third area, which links into that eliminating carbon emissions, is about the efficiency of buildings. So firstly, making sure that the buildings we occupy are as efficient as possible. And then where the buildings that we're already in, and how do we enhance the efficiency of those using energy optimization and using smart building technology. And Prad Panda is going to speak to that in a moment. And then also from all of the sites, this isn't just about the decarbonisation, it's also about making sure that we improve the biodiversity. And as Isabella mentioned, we also need to capture carbon from some of the sectors which will be slower to decarbonise. So making sure that we have the right approach to biodiversity and also including things like afforestation and so on. And Tim Howell will speak to that a little later on in the webinar. Next slide, please. So there's a range of things that we are doing as a business to look at how we can really lead on being a sustainable facilities management and carbon management business. So we're doing things ourselves and we're also helping our clients. So some of the examples is we reduce energy for our clients through optimization. For example, with over 544 gigawatt hours saved for one customer. We work with them to reduce our waste. On average, we've seen a 40% reduction in waste for those customers we support with their waste strategies since 2015. And then with our own business, as I said, we've already moved to 100% renewable energy, but we're really focused on going a lot further in that area with already over 500 electric vehicles on the road. And then some of the organisations that we're working with, Isabella mentioned EV100 and RE100. We've signed up to both of those and also the third of the climate group's initiatives, EP100, which is about improving energy productivity. And we're the 8th company globally to have signed up with to all 3 of those. We also have a very good carbon trust score with 81%, which is the leader in the facilities management industry in the UK. Our energy team have got the ISO 50001 accreditation, so we use that process when we're working with clients and indeed with ourselves to make sure that we optimize our energy as effectively as possible. And we were recently ranked by Sustainalytics, who are one of the big global ESG rating agencies, as the #1 FM business globally on our ESG performance with a score of 13.0, which is low risk. So we're doing a lot of things across a lot of different areas. We can just step on to the next slide, please. So why are we able to, I guess, go so far so fast? And the reason we're doing this webinar is to encourage as many other businesses to go as far and as fast as they can as well. Well, Mitie are very fortunate to have the expertise across a whole range of areas within our own business. And so we're simply bringing that expertise to bear on Mitie as we would on a client. So we're looking at a number of different areas, and I won't go through all of the aspects in detail because each of the members of the team is going to talk about an area or a case study that they've got on how they can make a difference to organizations. But we're looking at areas like infrastructure, so making sure that we've optimized that infrastructure, whether that be charging for electric vehicles, whether that be heating systems, typically areas around sort of capital projects and then the maintenance of those. Then how do we reduce the emissions? And for us, one of those big areas is that transition from diesel fleet to electric fleet. And then also thirdly, how do we optimize the resources that exist, whether that be putting better resources in place, so things like biodiversity, or reducing the amount of resources which are consumed with our waste team. So at Mitie, we think we've got a stretching but achievable target to remove all of those Scope 1 and 2 emissions by the end of 2025. We've got the expertise within our business. And what I'm going to do now is just hand over to each of the members of the team to talk a little bit about their area of expertise. So firstly, over to Prad Pandit, who heads up our Sustainability and Energy team.
Good morning. I'd like to build on a program that we undertook with one of our large clients, where we decided in conjunction with them to reduce their carbon impact and energy usage over a 5-year period. We are near about halfway in the contract. And as you can see, the target that we set ourselves collaboratively to reduce about 217 gigawatt hours over a 5-year period, we've reached around half of that, and that equates to 25,000 tons of carbon saved so far. We have done this by collaborating across multiple areas of work in a programmatic fashion. So we help them collaborate on the procurement side by buying green, ensuring that they are billed correctly, and finding opportunities for savings in terms of their procurement costs and managing the risks of that procurement. Then we use to look at their facilities and their buildings. And first intention is to run optimization programs with little or no capex or cost, using our expertise to optimize their existing systems. And we have examples across their data center, their retail facilities, and including their office by implementing improved controls or better schedules and start-stop times. When this facility has been optimized, then the next step is to look out for opportunities for carbon reduction capital projects. And here we have already done work around changing out the lighting systems, some improvements in their AC systems by changing out fans. And we are also now, given the success so far, we're working with our clients to produce a program of works over the next period, which helps stagger some investments in a way that it is self-funding. So as Simon mentioned, one of the plus points of this program, programmatic approach, is the fact that all these implementations and interventions result in energy savings, which translate in costs. And if you're able to structure the program in a way, it pays for itself. So there is really quite a strong business case that our clients in facilities teams, energy teams can make internally to their boards and approving authorities to make the funds available for implementing these solutions. And where sometimes the capital is not available, we are able to bring our funding partners and also provide clients with funding options to help implement these carbon reduction programs. One aspect of the work in this area is the fact of being transparent in what we are doing and being compliant with the mandatory requirements for sure, and also some voluntary disclosures that leading companies are taking in this area. So our client, in this case, we support them and partner with them on achieving ISO certification. We started with their data centers and moving on to their offices and retail subsequently. And as a next step, we are also embedding our own sustainability consulting expertise into their organization. So in a collaborative way, it's very possible for ambitious clients who have a carbon ambition to work with us to produce real measurable benefits, which in this case is also certified by an independent third-party company to provide that added assurance. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mike to talk about waste and how we reduce that.
Thanks, Brad. If you can move on to the next slide, please. Plainly, from a waste point of view, we're entering a new world, or new back to the offices, and now that we encounter this, obviously a number of clients around the UK and around the world have set themselves targets on reducing the amount of waste they produce and various different things. And plainly, at this point, we're adding a complication there with masks, gloves, cleaning materials, paper towels, extra, coming back into this environment that we've never dreamed of before. So we're already starting slightly back in the back foot. A lot of the presentations today have been looking to the future and what that brings and highlighting how things can be improved. Bizarrely, from a waste point of view, we actually need to rewind and look at the past, because examples of the circular economy today are all available from the past. We will all remember, I'll say the milk person because I'll be politically correct, but he was a milkman when I was growing up, used to deliver milk and take the glass bottle away and reuse it, recycle it and bring it back for reuse. We used to have deposit systems on pop bottles and various different things. So a lot of the inventions and things that are coming back now are actually from the past. And we need to look at these and highlight how we use these in a business environment. And they're very well documented in the Circular Economy. BS 8001 highlights some of the things that can be done. I'll introduce it to websites and various things you can look for data as we go through the presentation. But the fundamentals is we need to analyse what we are throwing away in an office or in a manufacturing site and understand where it's come from and why it's been produced in the first place. And a lot of this goes back to green procurement and looking at how we receive waste onto the sites. You know, we buy very small parts or very big parts, and some of the boxes and the containers and the processes that are put into preparing these things mean that the deselection of them or the dropping down of them is so complicated. So we need to talk to clients and suppliers about decomposition of the packaging and looking at, can we get to single source packaging, and not single use, I will highlight, but single source, so it's readily reused or readily recyclable, rather than being bits of wood, cardboard, glue, plastics, and various different things that make things very complicated. And the way we do this is actually looking and spending a lot of time with our clients, looking in bins, bizarrely, or looking at how things are received and highlighting how do we stop this and how do we prevent this waste arriving at various different facilities. Once it has arisen, what we then do is look at very much of how do we then prevent it from causing to become a waste stream, and how do we turn it into a raw material. So we do a lot of on-site treatment, where you will get mini MRFs on site, a MRF being a material recycling facility, so we can desegregate the materials. We also do a lot of recycling of food waste and turning it into compost that Tim will come on to shortly, who can mention where he can use it in the infrastructure of the buildings to put a greener place available to clients. And what we also operate is these waste performance certificates. So everybody will have heard of energy performance certificates and the value of highlighting where a building performs. From a waste point of view, we've chosen exactly the same format. And what we can do is benchmark either a building against one of its other sites in the building facility, or in its industry, or in its sector, and actually highlight where it sits and what improvements could be made to make that better. And some of these are very practical examples, and I'll come on to some of the examples of this shortly. If you could go on to the next slide, please. But without doubt, what we do end up with is still, there is some waste, or a resource, as I would like it to be now be called, still not wanted by an organisation. And we're in an interesting scenario at the moment where, with a lot of people working from home and such things, we have a lot of empty offices. And we have a lot of furniture and various different IT equipment and such things. And we've been working with a number of our clients to actually reuse that materials and actually produce desks and chairs and IT systems that are more equipped to go into a home environment rather than a work environment. And that's meant remanufacturing desks. We've also gone from remanufacturing under desk pedestals into lockers, into facilities, as people want to reduce the amount of materials they're taking into the office. And we've got many practical examples of basically offering support to companies who are desperate not to increase their waste production and have been able to sell additional furniture, be able to donate it to charities and social enterprises, or with warranties and everything that allows it to be reused rather than just thrown away. We've all come across companies that have a skip in the corner that is just for the stuff we don't know what to do with. Mitie's job, or what we've spent a lot of time doing, is looking at them waste streams and understanding what they are, and looking at how we prevent their generation in the first place. And as simple things of turning confidential waste back into stationery products, highlighting the fact that plastics can be turned into outside furniture. As we go back into the office environment, outside space is going to become a bigger thing, and we need to look at how we use that. And as I'll come on to in a second about education, what these are visual examples and important examples of highlighting that what is a waste to you on day one can become a very much a raw material in day two. And the way we do this, and the major push on this, is not just to understand what you throw away, but also we need to understand what you buy. We need to understand what people are purchasing and what they're doing, so we can actually link organisations who can say, I have product A that I don't need anymore, and product B could be bought by a company, and almost doing a swap shop scenario on offering materials that people don't want anymore to people who do want them. And this is proving extremely interesting and exciting, and actually is getting cooperation between organisations that, once again, I go back to 30, 40 years ago, when most manufacturing plants used to produce a material, and there was always an off material, an off spec, or a product that they didn't need anymore. And in 9 times out of 10, that became the raw materials of their next processing plant, and they operated that and moved that forward. ICI, I know don't exist anymore, but is a perfect example of that. And you can see plant 1, plant 2, plant 3, and it's all the byproducts of the various different plants being produced. And the fact that people can't get Marmite at the moment because nobody's brewing is a perfect example of the fact that a waste product from the brewing industry became a raw material that somebody uses every day and people purchase. So we've got to analyse and look at what is being produced and what we could do different with it. If you could go on to the next slide, please. And this is all done by hearts and minds and education. So we have a lot of awareness campaigns and a lot of drives and push people forward to understand, but visual examples of how things have been done. And what Mitie have now is approximately 150 examples of waste streams that we have identified on our client sites that were previously waste, that we've now actually been able to take back into the circular economy and either recycle that weren't previously being recycled, or sent for remanufacturing, or prevented completely. And that list is now proven. They're immediately available as resources to people to use. We have another 50 or 60 that we're still working on, but this is an ongoing process that allows people to think differently about what they throw away. And there's a lot of greenwashing goes around in the waste industry, and I'm sure in every other part of the industry as well. And therefore people saying, I've got to zero to landfill. It's great because they've started to think about it. But in reality, all they actually mean is I'm just burning more. What we have to do is start talking about prevention or reuse. Recycling's great, but prevention is the first thing of the circular economy. And we've got to look at how we prevent this waste being produced in the first place. And therefore producing these innovation project plans of highlighting what can be done differently and how we challenge this is really, really important. And we can drive this forward. And as I said, all these are examples of BS 8001, the management systems of the circular economy. And a number of these processes have now been audited by the Carbon Trust and proven to be accurate and good sound base. So I'm sure there'll be some questions at the end, but my number's at the end as well. Please contact me. We'd be delighted to talk to you more about some of the things we can offer and how we can drive this forward. And I'll hand you over to Tim.
Mike, thanks for that. And you know, it's right to focus on all the key contributors to carbon reduction, and lots of scientific studies and long papers have been written, and companies come up with plans. And somewhere in those plans there are three little words, and it probably comes somewhere towards the end of those plans. And those three little words are "and plant trees." And certainly afforestation and tree planting has a significant part to play in carbon reduction, but not everybody can go out and build or plant forests. So I didn't want to talk about and planting trees today, so I thought I'd have more of a discussion around biodiversity. At Mitie, we've committed to improving biodiversity on the sites that we're based at and the sites that we work at. So, biodiversity enhancement is really important, and it plays a key part in improving the planet that we live in at the moment. And it is also a byproduct of all the afforestation and other sort of environmental plans that are in place in the world at the moment. So it's really important that we invest in green space and that it's installed and managed properly over time so that it has the best effect on the environment. And using sustainable management techniques and sustainable methods of maintenance that reduce the amount of pesticide that we use, that use the waste that we produce from our green operations that are composted on site and reused back into the environment, is all part of sustainable management that we need to put in place to improve the sites that we work on. And all of this enables a focus not just on creating greener cities, but greener environments throughout the country and throughout the UK as well. So I put up a couple of quotes there about biodiversity, and the top two come from WWF and show the importance of why we need to focus on improving it. But 90% of wild plants, 75% of leading crops rely on pollinators. So pollinators being the bugs and the bees and hoverflies that fly around in our gardens and green spaces. And 1 out of 3 mouthfuls of food depends on pollinators. So, by taking action, we can actually ensure food supply throughout the planet for many years to come. And the Royal Horticultural Society have stated that it's generally accepted that pollinators are in decline. So therefore, that is a call to action, and many of us will have sites that we have, which have green spaces that we can take some positive action on this. So by installing and managing green space correctly, you can lock in carbon. So albeit fairly small amounts over a long period of time, green space can lock in carbon if it's managed properly. By maintaining those green spaces in an environmentally sustainable way, you can create environmental resilience as long as the schemes are designed appropriately and taking into account climate change. There's no point putting in schemes that will be adversely affected by climate change. By understanding the existing ecology on the sites that we look after, we can come up with plans that enable us to enhance the biodiversity. It's not just a case of putting in some plants and trees. It needs to be planned and managed professionally to make sure that we can make a difference. But let's be honest, so what we do, it's a little bit of a green wrapper. Every environmental scheme and every carbon reduction scheme will have a picture of a tree or some plants somewhere within the scheme. You know, that is key to getting across a green message. I understand that, but it's actually a real action that we can take on the many sites that we do. It demonstrates environmental commitment. So if you write a load of information in a report that is stored away on the internet somewhere, that's all fine. But if you've got sites that you can demonstrate your environmental commitment by doing something visible and tangible, then it shows that you're an organisation that is committed to environmental improvement. There's no doubt that it improves the well-being of people who work in your site. It enhances the experience of customers who visit your sites as well. And most importantly, if you have buildings that are within communities, it connects you to the communities in which your buildings and your people are based. We work a lot with property managers throughout the UK. They maintain or manage thousands and thousands of sites, and whether it's supermarkets, corporate estate or industrial sites, there's always something that can be done, and all those individual pockets of biodiversity enhancement can all join up and create larger habitats for biodiversity improvement. One of the examples that I've got on the screen here is a shopping centre where millions of customers go to every year. And there is a rather wild area out the back, which we stripped off the soil and we put in the correct level of sterile soil and installed wildflower seeds, which you can see on the pictures there, which looked absolutely amazing. We also installed bug hotels, and I often talk about being able to provide bug hotels from the humble B&B, excuse the pun, to the a top 5-star hotel. And in this case, you can just about see it in that bottom picture. There's a queue for Queensgate, which is a tower block for bugs and bees and all sorts of other invertebrates. So one of the things that scheme did, it created an actual viral PR storm throughout Peterborough. It was so attractive. It was in a very prominent position, and it absolutely demonstrated that customer had environmental commitment. So what can we do for you? We can work with you to design the most appropriate scheme. We can ensure that your investment has the right impact. We can also ensure that you have a long-term plan to create and manage sustainable landscaping, to demonstrate your environmental commitment, improved biodiversity and plant trees. So thank you very much, and I will now pass back to Simon.
Thank you very much, Tim. Last slide before we kind of move on to Q&A. So please do put any questions you've got into the section at the bottom of your screen. So Mitie have made a big step towards a zero carbon fleet. We do have one of the largest fleets, as I mentioned, and it was 505 when I wrote the deck. It's 513 this morning, electric vehicles on the road, with over 600 more on order. And we've installed the charge points to support that with over 634 charge points installed. And this is all part of that commitment to getting to zero carbon by the end of 2025. And we're making some good progress, as you can see on screen. But there are two key bits I want to call out. One is this is actually saving money as well as the carbon reduction. Electric cars are now cheaper on a 4-year whole life cost basis than any other fuel type. And if you're paying benefit in kind as a company car driver, you'll be saving a significant sum, from about £1,250 for a 20% taxpayer in an Astra to about £4,500 for a 40% taxpayer in a 3 Series BMW. So it works for the employer and it works for the employee. But the big thing here is that this is not just about vehicles. This is not just about moving from one vehicle type to another. Actually, now it's about an integrated energy system that you need to put in place, which happens to have cars and vans attached to it. And that's why we're using the expertise from across all the different parts of the business, particularly in Prad's team around energy and around projects, to make sure that we're in a really good position to roll all of those vehicles out. And we also will be announcing later on today about the proposition that we're able to provide out to our clients to help them with their own transition services, or the transition of their EV fleet to get to zero carbon themselves. So we can just move on to the next slide, please. And so the key message I would like sort of everyone to take away is that it is now possible to do an end-to-end transition to a zero carbon fleet at no additional cost. And we believe that fleets can do that. There's the capability exists. And we're really happy to help any organisations who are interested in understanding more about that. Okay, so hopefully that's given you some good insight into all of the things that we're doing. I'm now going to move across to the questions and answers. So thank you for those of you who've posted questions. Please continue to do so if you have any for the panelists. So the first one, Isabella, is for you. You mentioned that there are 85,000 green jobs in your presentation. The question's been asked whether they're new jobs or reskilling and redeployment of existing jobs.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, so they're job supported, so they are a mixture of existing and new. But I think where it progressed from the original Keeping Us Competitive report to the 5-pager is that obviously in the current crisis and I suppose slack in the labour market, the vast majority of them are now likely to be new and also would help avoid job losses. So some of them are protecting existing jobs, but there is a whole chunk of new jobs in there. And we saw with the Chancellor's announcement last week, particularly around those energy efficiency jobs, that the money he's put forward is going to create a large amount of new jobs in that industry.
Great, thank you very much, Isabella. The next question is I guess for all the members of the panel, probably from the Mitie team. So I'll just step through you quickly, each of you, and try and keep the answers short in the interest of time. But the question is that one of our attendees is doing some work for an organisation, and they've been asked to look at how they get them to carbon neutral status. They're already at zero to landfill, and so looking for some advice on where to start. So Prad, I'll come to you first. Where would be the sort of couple of areas you'd call out for them to focus on in your area of specialism?
I think one of the quick win areas, if you will, is to relook at the monitoring and targeting system and know exactly the situation you have with respect to your procurement costs, that you're billed properly, and where you are emitting, what your carbon footprint looks like, and when you do that good monitoring and targeting and reporting, you get a clear view of where the opportunities are. And some of those opportunities can be accessed with, as I said, low cost, no cost improvements, which can generate between 6 to 8% typically of your utility bill in terms of savings. So one can then take that 6 to 8% savings and plow it back into other projects or activities, whether it be around waste or biodiversity or improving further the efficiency of the buildings, or we can plow that back in a programmatic way and then look for opportunities that create further savings and do that over a period of time to get you to reduce carbon at very low cost or literally zero cost. So I'd start with a robust understanding of the current terrain with good monitoring and targeting.
Thanks, Brad. Mike?
Very simple, Simon. Basically tell people to go onto the Resource Not Waste Visionary website and you'll get probably 100 of the 150 options that Mitie and case studies there showing examples of how to start preventing waste. Zero to landfill's lovely, but actually as the future progresses, it's all about prevention, not actually just taking it a different route.
Thanks, Mike. Tim, any areas from you?
I'm just going to say plant wildflower meadows, I think, Simon. I think, you know, wherever there's an opportunity to do that, and if waste sites have that ability to, you know, invest money into that and demonstrate environmental commitment.
Okay, thanks, Tim. And I'd just add, look at the transport, because it's bound to be a huge part of their emissions. And so what are the opportunities available to move to a zero carbon transport solution? Okay, we've got another question. Isabella, I think for you. You've been asked what the top areas are that you would encourage businesses to focus on to address the carbon challenge.
Yeah. So I always think you need to really look at and assess where you're having the most impact. So the Our Planet, Our Business film, which I mentioned in my presentation, which I would really recommend, identifies 5 principles for businesses. So they look at zero carbon, minimizing the space we use, returning oceans to good health, eliminating waste, and reimagining success, which I think was great to see a lot of those topics covered in your presentation today, and really great to see Mitie setting an ambitious 2025 net zero target, because we really do need to go as fast as we can. And if organizations can do that, then it makes sense, I suppose, in terms of making sure you have that advantage. In terms of personally, I think efficiencies, so buildings in terms of reducing your energy use, and then switching your power and transport to low carbon. And nature is obviously a really critical one for us at the WWF, what that can offer in terms of biodiversity and carbon removal. But also I think we've seen even more in lockdown what green spaces do in terms of well-being, and also improved health in terms of air quality as well.
Great, thank you very much, Isabella. So there's a question here around the electric vehicles, which I'll just pick up. So whether I mentioned about the fact there's a financial saving as well as a carbon saving, and whether we've been able to calculate a pounds per kilo number. I think the straight answer is we haven't done that, because there are some vehicle types which cost money to transition currently, and some which save you money. So it depends exactly on what your fleet mix are and on what the speed at which you transition. And so trying to do that kind of linear linkage, I don't think is realistic. But certainly all of the fleets that we've looked at so far, which are kind of mixed fleets, so cars and vans and light commercial, are able to transition with that zero cost. When you get into the real HGV areas, then some of them will take a little longer. Okay, and then I think this is probably going to be the last question that we have time for. So I think probably for you initially, Prad, is whether we're seeing that there are supply chain delays caused by COVID, delaying the tech that's required to make these changes, and therefore slowing down the ability to implement new solutions?
Not really. We have not experienced that. I would say that our clients are definitely currently quite occupied in the reoccupation of their facilities, and some of our clients are definitely looking at what the shape of that facility looks like moving forward, as the working patterns are most definitely going to change and be impacted. But contrary to what one would expect, we see an increased enthusiasm and activity, and people still wanting to ensure that the programs with respect to reduction of carbon, reduction of energy, they continue as our facilities start to get reoccupied. And none of the partners or suppliers that we work with have any concerns, or we don't see any risks with progressing as we all together restart the economy.
Great, thank you very much. So, conscious of time, there are some more questions I'm afraid we haven't got time to get to. And so what we will do is make sure we follow up with those people who've asked those questions. Apologies we didn't get to them all, just far too many for the time available. So thank you ever so much for your attendance today, and I'll hand you back to Harriet.
Thanks everyone. Thank you for joining today's seminar. The recording and the slide pack will be published shortly, and we will also release the details for our next seminar in the coming days. Thank you again, and stay safe.